Okay, so I guess like to serve as a shtickle disclaimer or introduction to the shir that we're about to discuss, I just wanted to share a story that I heard from Rav Avram Shor about Rav Israel Tauber. Rav Israel Tauber was a yid from Monsey. I think he's not alive anymore. He was born in Budapest, like in the 1940s, right in the lead up to the liquidation of all the Jews in Hungary. He said that his mother, at the time of when the Nazis invaded, and all the Jews were carted off, his mother was pregnant, and he said it actually was the reason that saved her life, because she was pregnant, they took her to study, to conduct medical studies and etc. on her, and ultimately that's what saved her life. Although that pregnancy, of course, didn't survive. Now, he says that after the war, when he survived and his mother survived, he asked her, he said, I don't understand how during those dark days in Hungary and Budapest in the 1940s, why were you having children? How were you able to, and why were you, having children at the time? And he said she told her something that was like a profound message that really stuck with him. And that was as follows. She said, every child that I'm able to bring into this world is nitzchias. It doesn't matter the condition of the child. It doesn't matter what happens with the child. It doesn't matter if the child is abled or disabled. It doesn't matter ruchnistic how they end up. Every child that I bring into this world is nitzchias, and what happens with them afterwards is already Hashem's department. And because of that, she said, I was able to bring children into the world no matter what. And look at you. You survived, you thrived, you have a whole family, because I was committed to bringing nitzchias. Now, and I think that story, the hashkafa that she's espousing and sharing with her son, is ultimately the Bria Hatachta, and it's the true and underlying hashkafa that Yidden have when it comes to having children, is that, we're doing what we're supposed to, and everything that we bring into the world, every neshama that we bring into the world is nitzchias. Like Chazal say, Im ben David Bach, tichlekal neshama shebeguf, every neshama that we bring in, and no matter how incomplete the neshama is, it's a special neshama. It's a neshama that serves a tachlis, that has a purpose. And for sure, once we open up the union of Gilgul on neshamas, so everything has a tachlis. It serves a purpose, and it's nitzchi. And what exactly it shakes out to be, or how it turns out to be, is not so much our department. And because of that, that's like a hashkafa that is like a basic hashkafa. Now, keeping that in mind, I want to have this discussion that we'll call it's a thought experiment more than anything else, to discuss maybe some limitations. Okay, so I think one of the main hallmarks, probably from people, Charei that you mentioned, is large families. And I think that really cuts across, and by large I mean relatively large. Even 4 or 5 kids is considered very large in Western society. Nobody in the Western world has 4 or 5 children. That's a tremendous family. Agaret, 7, 8 children, or 12 or 13 children, or these family sizes are considered very, very large by Western standards, where most from Jews live in Western countries. We have these large families. Now, this really cuts through, all segments: Sfardim, Ashkenazim, Litvish, Yeshivish. Everyone has families is a thing. Now, obviously, we understand that a big Jewish hashkafa is that having a lot of children is a big malyusa. Maybe it's a mitzvah, maybe it's not a mitzvah. We'll talk about some of the pratim, but it's considered a thing. Now, there's many, many, many chuvas from the Achrayim throughout the years about, most of them are about very primitive forms of birth control from back in the day or whatever, family planning and etc. And that's not really the shmuz that I want to talk about. I want to talk about a hypothetical question, call it a thought experiment, and that's as follows. You paint the scenario on your own, because I don't know what everyone would consider constitutes the scenario. But let's say you're living in a generation where it's impossible to raise from children. You decide whatever that means. Whatever that means, you make the case in your head what impossible to raise from children is, but you're living in a generation. I said you make the case in your head. You're living in a generation where it's impossible to raise from kids. Are you able to opt out of having children? Could you say, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have kids. I don't want to. What am I having kids from? Having kids that are going to be bad kids that are not going to be raised properly. I want to opt out. I don't want to have children. Is that a legitimate rationale, svara, logic according to halacha, hashkafa, etc., or is that beyond the pale? And you do your job, and what happens with them is not your. It doesn't matter how they turn out. Okay, so let's see. So the real reason why this pattern I had this week obviously has to do with the parsha, because the famous medrash in the beginning of the parsha, Rashi brings it down.
says Vayisreitet to Habanim Bekirba. Rivka was pregnant with her two children, with the twins, and they were being misreitet Bekirba. They were jostling inside of her. So it says Vatei L'chudur Hashem, and she said Imkein Lamazah Anochi. What did you say? Yeah. So she went to Biderish and Imkein Lamazah Anochi. Now Rashi tells us Medrash what was happening. When she would pass by a base of a Zara, they would start jump. There would be activity. They would be jumping, and when she'd pass by a base Medrash, they'd be jumping. And Rivka was very confused. What is this? And she said, Imkein Lamazah Anochi. If I'm going to have a child who's going to be an Ovid of Zara, I'd rather not contribute to that, and I don't want to have a child. Now she goes and she hears the news that no, you're having twins. Shnei goyim v'vitnech. One's good, one's bad. It's going to be a whole complicated process. History is going to unfold through these two children, and she decides to go through with it. Now, Rivka's starting posture over there seems to be that if it would be true that the children that she's about to bring to this world are going to be Ovdei Zara, are going to be bad children, she'd like to opt out. Imkein Lamazah Anochi. Well, what am I doing? I don't need to be doing this. I don't need to be having children that are going to be bad children. Now, so as a first basis, like first data point on this chart over here, it seems like Rivka is suggesting this svara. Rivka saying, anytime you can't be guaranteed, or you're guaranteed the children are going to be bad, not say you can't, but you're guaranteed the children are going to be bad, so then just opt out, don't have kids, it's not worth it. Now, the problem is, and this is a kasha that many ask right away, that there's a Gemara in Brachos and Daf Yud that seems to be in direct conflict to this thing. The Gemara in Brachos and Daf Yud, it's a famous Gemara. The Gemara brings the story of Chizkiyahu, right? The Gemara tells us that Chizkiyahu was it was the eve of his battle with Sancheriv. So it's a heightened, very, very risky time. Chizkiyahu suddenly falls deathly ill. And Hashem sends Yeshayahu and Navitim to tell him, Meisata v'lo sichya, which is a double lashon of you're going to die. You're going to die and you're not going to live, which means to imply you're going to die over here and you're not going to have any Olam Haba. So Chizkiyahu is taken aback. Chizkiyahu was a tzaddik. He was busy bringing people back to tshuva. And he says, Amalei mai kuli hai. What did I do that's so terrible that justifies this harsh einish that you're telling me in the name of Yeshaya? Yeshaya is telling me in the name of Hashem. So he says, Le'esakta b'peri v'rivya. You were not Isaac in having children. Amalei, so Chizkiyahu tells him, Mishum d'chazayli b'ruach HaKodesh, nafki minay b'nin d'lei malu. I saw in Ruach HaKodesh that I'm going to have bad kids. And Chizkiyahu was 100% correct. The children that Chizkiyahu did end up having after this story were bad children. So Chizkiyahu says, I saw in Ruach HaKodesh that they're going to be bad children. So I opted out. So Amalei, Yeshayahu tells him this fateful line, and this is like a major line. He says, Bahadi kavshi d'rachman ala malach. And Hashem's cheshbonus, are you mixing into Hashem's cheshbonus? My demifke this, ibayilach lemevet. What you were told to do is what you're supposed to do. Meaning you have a mitzvah, like you're saying, puravu, go have children, don't make cheshbonus, don't start figuring out where they're going to end up. My demifke this, havalach lemevet. You're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. And Bahadi kavshi d'rachman ala malach, why are you mixing in? So Chizkiyahu says, and this is an interesting twist to the story. He says, Amalei, fine, hashta havli bratach, give me a daughter. Efshe, maybe that your schos and my schos will end up having good kids together. Amalei, kar nigzer alach gzeira. The gzeira was already nigzer that you're going to die. I'm not bothering with you. So Amalei, Chizkiyahu looks up from his deathbed and he says to Yeshayahu, Ben Amutz, kalein v'os chavatzei. Okay, you're done. You're finished. You finished your nevuah, now go out of here. Kach mekablanim beis aviyaba, fil cherev chadam anachas al shavar shaladam al yimnatz min arachim. Even if there's a sharp blade in a person's neck, he shouldn't be menei himself from Rachman. So Chizkiyahu loses patience, so to speak, with Yeshaya's nevuah. He says, okay, goodbye, I'll take care of this now. And he davens, Vayisev panav alakir, and the Gemara tells us how he davened. And Yeshayahu ends up living, and Chizkiyahu ends up marrying the daughter of Yeshayahu, and together they produce some delightful Rishayim. It doesn't work out. Now Chizkiyahu seemingly is expressing this svara that I'm going to have bad kids. And Chizkiyahu is Tam Chacham. He said, I'm going to have bad kids, I'm opting out. Comes Yeshayahu and he says, you don't make cheshbonis like that, you just have children. Now, the Brisker Rav and the Chaim Volozhin really ask this and say, so then what was Rivka's rationale? And Rivka says, she sounds like she's opting out because of the svara. Chizkiyahu sounds like you're not allowed to opt out from the svara. So this story seems to be a cautionary tale. What happened to Rivka? So Chaim Volozhin says in Shara Aleph and Nefesh HaChaim that there's a difference between before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, mitzvahs are logical, they're rationales. And if you feel like the rationale is not lining up, you could opt out. Meaning this is not the right way to do it, you opt out. But Lacham Matan Torah, mitzvahs are given as tzivuyim, they're given as, instructions, and there's no more opting out anymore. You do what you're told, and that's how Chaim Volozhin says. Brisker Rav says something else interesting. Brisker Rav says that Rivka was a woman. Women are not mechuyev in period of Rivya. The Mishnah in Yevamos and the Samachay says men are mechuyev to have children, women are not mechuyev to have children. Now, that's the mitzvah deraisa pruvu. Possibly women are mechuyev in the mitzvah of sheves, which is just in general building a family. But the simple, according to most Rishonim, and the Rosh Hashanah paskins like this, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins like this, and Even HaEzer and Siman Aleph, women are not mechuyev. So says the Brisker Rov, she was not mechuyev. For her, this is all extra credit. So she says, listen, extra credit, I'm not in for extra credit if it's going to be bad kids. There's no extra credit in having bad kids. I want out. Chizkiyahu, he was mechuyev, he didn't have this option. So you have over here, like, the Achronim who are extrapolating from this Gemara and Brachas, that it seems that even if it's impossible to raise good children, you're not allowed to opt out and say, I'm opting out because I'm going to have bad kids. That's not your decision to make. You have to mekayim your mitzvahs, whatever they are, and what will happen with the kids is not directly your concern to incorporate into the Shiloh. So now I want to share a few different Gemaras that I think are, so 1 second. First let me tell you a story. There's a story, this is said over in many of the Chumash Svarim, the Likat Svarim, the Musa Svarim. The story made its way into tens of different places, which either means that one guy said it and everybody liked it, or it's actually a true story. There's no way to know for sure. But the Chafetz Chaim, supposedly there was a woman who had 2 children already. She had a boy and a girl already, which means as a family they were mekayim in the mitzvah of having children already. And she was by the Chafetz Chaim and she was nudging him and beseeching him to get her more kids. She wanted more kids. The doctor said she wasn't able to have more children. She wants more children. And the Chafetz Chaim looked at her and he said, Tachterol, it's a genig shver to raise the kids that you have in today's dar. He's talking in the 1920s, like we've been learning everything he thinks about the generation. He says, Tachterol, it's very hard to raise from kids in this dar. The yeshivas of Hadar ben Haskell is rampant. Everybody's blindingly poor. It's very, very hard to raise children right now. It's genug that you have what you have. Go try to raise those. You don't need more. This is what he told her. Now, it's like an eye-raising story. You would never imagine the Chafetz Chaim would say that. The story makes its way in a lot of different versions. Some say the versions are that she was asking for a ness. Chafetz Chaim said you don't ask for a ness in such a case. Or Mrs. Zalman said over a different version. There's a lot of different versions. But Beini, one way or another, the Chafetz Chaim told her something to this effect. It's time to have children at a time when it's going to be so difficult to raise them. You don't have to have 10 kids now. Have 2 kids. That's what he seemed to have told her. Now, the Chafetz Chaim is seemingly going on the tzad that we opened up with, that a person could make these type of calculations. A person could say it's very, very hard to have. Yeah, well, okay, so yeah. L'chayru, you could say the Chafetz Chaim is only talking about after you're mekayim the mitzvah deraisa approval. And after that, when it comes to the extra credit, Sheves and Be'erev and all these other mitzvahs derabbanans about having more children, the Chafetz Chaim is saying, maybe not. Now, I direct your attention to the Gemara in Brachas. Seemingly, the Chafetz Chaim is going against this Gemara. The Gemara seems to say very clearly, at the pain of death, you do. He's saying he wasn't mekayim peruvuya. Okay, so that is a possible chiluk. Now, so let's just look at a few different Gemaras that I think are somewhat enlightening in this discussion. So 1 second. There's a Gemara in Baba Basra. Actually, let's start with the Gemara in Saita. The Gemara in Saita is a famous Gemara. The Gemara in Saita, Nafi Beis, tells us the story of Amram by the Gzeira of Parai, right? It says Amram, Parai made a Gzeira, the Kala Ben Hayulad, Lanera Tashlichu, right? Should be thrown in the river, meaning all the boys are going to be killed. So it says Amram, who was the God Ladar. And it's interesting, I don't know how many times by my morning share I have someone who sits with ChatGPT and fact checks all these things when we say quotes like this, but we're missing that over here. But I don't know how many times the Gemara refers to someone with the Shtela as God Ladar. Meaning it's not hundreds of times, it's a handful of times, and we'll have to ask Tzvi to. So, but the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, Amram Gad Lahadar Haya. Amram was the Gad Lahadar. Kivin Shirasha Amar Pari Harasha Kalabena Yulad Hiyeret Ashtichu. When he heard Pari say this Gzeira that every Ben who's born should go in the river, Amar L'Shavanu Amelim. We're working for nothing. Amar the Girish Zishte. So he divorced his wife. What are we having children for? Now, explain that the math for me. Amram is faced with, granted over here it's a physical danger, it's not a spiritual danger. Amram realizes that the odds of raising these children that he's going to have to adulthood are very, very, very low. It's a very, very tough situation to bring children into the world. And Amram says, L'shavonu amelim, Amar the Girish Zishte. Amdu Kulam, the Girish Zishte. Amram was the Gad Ladar, he's a role model. He divorced his wife, everybody divorced their wives. So Amram Lebita, Miriam, his daughter, tells him, Abba, Kashak Zeirascha Yaisim Mishal Parai. Your Gzeira is even worse than Parai. Shepara Legazer Al-Ascharim. Pari only made the Gzeira on boys, on male children. You're making it on males and females. Pari maybe his rule will last, maybe it won't last. You're a tzaddik. So Amad v'hichzer sishte. So he took the muster from his daughter who was in single digits. A little girl, 4, whatever, I don't have to make the math exactly, but a little girl. And he said, you know what, you're right, Miriam. And he goes and he marries Yocheved again. And from his second marriage, call it that, Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Miriam's older. Miriam's the oldest. Aaron and Miriam both born. So yes, there's a boy and a girl in the picture. Keep that in mind. That's good. That's an important deal. There's a boy and a girl in the picture, right? That's true. But Amram had a boy and a girl in the picture, but it doesn't mean that everyone who followed him had a boy and a girl in the picture. And Amram was operating in the role as Gadol Hadar. He wasn't a personal decision. It was a decision for everybody. He was leading by example and saying, it's it's not, you don't have kids in the situation. And everybody followed him. And it's Mistavra that a lot of the other people who followed him did not have a boy and a girl already and still understood from Amram that L'shav, not worth it. Now, another Nakud that's interesting in this Gemara is Miriam tells him, and the main crux of her argument, is, at least the first piece of her argument is, that Pari was guys are only on male children, you're being guys are males and females. The Mashmayis is that Lu Yitzur, there'd be a way to isolate, to not have boys when boys are in danger. Miriam would have agreed. Miriam was just saying, Higzamta, you're overdoing it. Because Pari is only going after 50%, or whatever, 48% are boys, whatever it is, and you're taking out the whole thing. Higzamta, it's too much. But it sounds like Lu Yitzur, they could isolate and say, no boys, don't have any boys. Miriam would have been on board. Now, granted, the rest of the tinus are more Elam Haba, Elam Haza, and Neshamas, other things. There's more tinus in that Gemara. But again, you have in this Gemara, you seemingly like Amram is he's running the numbers, he's doing a risk benefit analysis, and he's saying, L'shav anu amelim. I'm not masking to do this in this type of period. Now, which again would seem to be some sort of makar for the story of the Chofetz Chaim. Now, there's a second Gemara that's a fascinating Gemara, mamash, an interesting Gemara. There's a Gemara on the the Gemara is in Avodah Zarah I'm confused. Baba Basra, Samach Hamid Beis. The Gemara in Baba Basra and Samach Hamid Beis brings something fascinating. It talks about from Miriam herself, exactly.
2 years old.
Yeah, it's mamash a child.
She's a child, it's his child, meaning the irony of it is he's trying to stop children.
But that's neither here nor there in our discussion. It's just right. It doesn't move the needle. It doesn't move the needle. Now, there's an interesting Gemara in Baba Basra and the Samachon Beis. It's fascinating Gemara. The Gemara tells us about the reaction that Klal Yisrael had. Who told me this? Oh, I was listening to a shir from someone, I don't remember who. I don't know if this is Eis Galton, I think, to say even. But he was handling the origin of the Seder. The Seder is built on a lot of minhagim and different layers and layers and layers. And he said, what was this? What did the Seder look like the first year after the Churban? Right? We know the Seder is modeled a lot on the Korban Pesach and so many parts of it. And what did the Seder look like the first year after the Churban? And he's basically trying to draw the clock back all the way to the beginning and figure out the origins of the Seder. And he says, he asked Chacham, I forgot what he said. He asked, and he said, the answer? He told me the first year after the Churban, he sat and cried. That's what the Seder looked like the first year. Meaning, when you try to imagine the period coming from the Beis HaMikdash, and everyone was bringing karbanos, and they were all doing Alila Regel, traveling to Eretz Yisrael, and families were getting together, by the dozens and huge families. The first year that they were in Galus, they sat and cried. Which exact minhag? It's an interesting perspective, and I don't know if it's Eis Galton say that because Medina the Gemara, there's probably things they were doing, and I'm sure there was Jews who were doing some form of a Seder already, but it's an interesting perspective. So this Gemara Babasa and the Samach Beis is very much along those same lines. It says Tana Rabbanan Kishacharav Habayis B'Shniya. When the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabu Prushim B'Yisrael, there was a large contingent of Prushim in Yisrael. Shleilechel Basar Shleilish Tesyayin. People they stopped enjoying the world. Meaning they were crushed. They stopped eating wine. They stopped drinking. They stopped eating meat. They stopped drinking wine. They were crushed. So it says in the Tapalam Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua was sent to deal with them, to explain to them why that's like an erroneous posture to take over here. Amalahem, he says, B'ni, why are you withholding? Why are you abstaining? Amalei nechal basar shemimenu makriv magav mizbeach v'ach shabatel nishte yayin shemenachsen al gav mizbeach v'ach shabatel. What are we going to eat and drink wine and basar, which were the staples of the mizbeach? How can we do that? Like a version of Eich Nashir Asher Hashem Alad Masnech. How can we do such a thing? So he tells them, Amalahem imkein lechem le'nechal shekvar batel menachas. Don't eat bread because that's the menachas. So, okay, fine. They didn't argue with him. They said, okay, fine, we'll incorporate that also. No more bread. After Paris will become only fruit based. Paris le'nechal shekvar batel bikurim. Bikurim was from Paris. Okay, after Paris acherim that are not from the Shivas Aminim. He says, Mayim le'nish shekvar batel nisach hamayim. You can't drink water. There was water on the Mizbeach. So Shasku, they were quiet. Amalahem, he told them, B'ni, I'm going to tell you how to do this. You're right. To just ignore that this terrible calamity befell Klal Yisrael, we're in Galus and the Churban happened, I'm not telling you to ignore it. Also. But to just remain broken completely for Dairis, that also you can't do. And from this develops the basic dinam that we know of Zeichel Churban, meaning like what we leave the square and certain types of music. And the dinam of Zeichel Churban are an outcropping, a growth of this Gemara, of this pivotal conversation that Rabbi Shua had with the Prushim of the day. Now, what's fascinating is the Gemara at the end of this Gemara brings like a different side trip. The Gemara says like this. It says, it like recaps this discussion a little bit and brings the psak that this is the right amount of Zeichel Chorban, not more than that. It says as follows: Miyayim shepashta malchus harasha. From the day that the Romans really sank their teeth into ruling Klal Yisrael, shegezeres aleinu gzeris royis v'kashas. They keep doubling down and tripling down with very, very harsh gzeris. Umevatlis mimenu Torah mitzvahs, and the mevatel Torah mitzvahs. Ve'em menichan oisel likanas l'shvua haben, and they don't let us do bris milah on our children. Dinhu shenigzar al atzmeinu shleilisa isha v'lahilad banim. We should stop having children. Now this is Kamat as close to Mefurish Gemara as you're going to find for this. The Gemara says that dinhu, the richtige thing, the appropriate reaction to such type of religious challenge, to an inability to raise the children, properly, should be that we shouldn't have children b'chlal. But v'nim tezar shel Avram Avinu kala me'elav, and the bloodline of Avram Avinu will be dissipated on its own. And the Gemara is not saying that as a taina, it's saying that as a good thing. Instead of it being destroyed at the hand of the Romans, let it just dissipate on its own. Let's give it a bakavadik death, so to speak. Like, let's give Jews a bakavadik death. Ella hanachlam liyisrael mutar sheyishegin v'ayim. Leave them. Klal Yisrael is not holding by this. They're not holding by this type of thing. Now, there's a big machlekes Rishonim how to learn what the hanachlam, what are they doing wrong? So the Rashbam over here says, Mashalek chanashim she'enon svurim she'yeshes b'davar. Rashbam sounds like the hanachlam is that they're getting married even though they really shouldn't. Like hanachlam that people are getting married even though they really shouldn't get married. Other Rishonim, the Meiri and others learn the Gemara differently. But here you have a Gemara that seems to almost say mefurish, talking about a spiritual challenge, not a physical challenge, not a physical danger, talking about spiritual danger. And it's saying once the Romans really, like the funds and they're really in our business and it's impossible to raise children properly, really should stop having them, because what do you, mamash like the Chafetz Chaim's quote, like it's hard enough in this. There's no distinction between ki and puravu, not ki and puravu. It says clearly, v'tehizari shel Avram Avinu kala me'elav. Meaning it's this one. There's no nuance. This is like a sledgehammer. I'm saying there's no depends which mitzvah you're talking about. This one's like such a harsh one to read. Now here seems to be maybe the makar for what the Chafetz Chaim, that story with the Chafetz Chaim. Now what do you do with the Gemara in Brachas? The Gemara says b'hadi kavsha, so it seems like this is not optional. So either it's a machlekes hasugis, in which case, go figure. Ask a very big rabbi, and I think you know the answer. I mean, this is all obviously halacha shlei l'maisa because the definite hashkafa is not like this. Meaning we don't say, and then you could, there's an interesting Sefer Chassidim that I came across. I just want to read you the Sefer Chassidim. Sefer Chassidim says like this. Sefer Chassidim is a nice shinai vav. He says ksiv. He's referring to the mitzvah of Baboy Kizrei Zerachel Arval Tanach Yedecha. This is a mitzvah everybody knows. It's Gemara in Yivamis that says that even if you had children, you were kind of mitzvah. A person's supposed to have more children. Now, I want to share that Gemara in a second because I think it really flips this whole thing on its head. But he says as follows: Ksiv Baboy Kizrei Zerachel Arval Tanach Yedecha. Amar of the story. L'kachti isha b'nuresecha v'yolda u'meisa al teisha b'skenusecha b'loi isha lama ki ein chayidei v'gemer. He quotes the Gemara in Yivamis. Aval mikach isha sha'achel v'ima roim. If you take a woman, he's talking about in a case where you're looking for a wife. You take a woman whose brothers and her mother are bad. They show no redeeming factors. They're not going to They don't seem to have any good tchunis in them. It's very likely that whatever children you produce from this union will be bad. He addresses the Gemara in Brachas clearly. In a case like that, is not what the Gemara is referring to. So the Sefer Chassidim seems to be learning that means Chizkiyahu was faulted for trusting his reed so clearly, even though it's Baruch HaKodesh. But maybe something good will come out of it still. And Taka, some Chizkiyahus, Einiklach and Ir Einiklach, and some of them became tremendous people. So meaning he was faulted for trusting his reed. How could you be so certain that it's going to be bad? But the Sefer Chassidim is saying, if one is really certain that they're going to be bad kids, then there's makom to live this out. Now the problem is, and I think this is really what turns the whole thing on its head, and why these Gemaras are not understood kipshuta, is as follows. The Gemara in Yivamis that says be'erav tanach yedecha, the Gemara says as follows: if he had children when he's young, he should have more children when he's old. Why? Shiat the ideya, and I forgot the exact quote. You don't know which ones are going to end up being good and which ones are going to end up being bad. Meaning, as best as you try, not every kid's going to have an equal shot at success in every way. And Mamela, sometimes it's the youngest in the family. Rav Shach was the youngest of 13 kids. None of them survived the war besides him, for example. There's many secular, noble laureates who or like the baby of a big family, some farikta family somewhere, and the baby, and like, so you never know which kid is going to be the one who's going to be the successful kid, the one who's going to really carry the legacy. So you have the idea. Now, I ask you, if the rationale for having a large family, the hashkaf for having a large family, is because you don't know yet the idea which one is going to be the best one, the good one. So then, the more the odds are that it's hard to raise children, the more children you need to have. If it becomes likely that your children are not going to be good, so then you have to have 500 kids, because what's the odds, right? What do you say? It's a lot of tuition, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Meaning, if the lumdus of the Gemara in Yevamos is quantity over quality, that's what it says. It says quality can't be guaranteed. How do you know which child is going to be the quality child? So go for quantity, and at least then, one or two, something will be the child, will be the good child. So now, in a case, in this hypothetical case where it's impossible to raise good children, the halacha should be fakir. Not only by hadikash rahman alamalach, like why are you thinking about it? Adrabah. I have more so that akal tzar shlei taveh, if 10 of them go off the derech, if 20 of them are bad, you have 2 that are still successful kids. So this, it's not a good kasha. It's a good kasha. No?
So what was the shayla? What was her question right now in regards to in the parasha?
Yeah, when she says Im kein lamazeh anochi.
Yeah, how do we tie this all together?
So Im kein lamazeh anochi. So we said from different achronim that Im kein lamazeh anochi was either because she was a woman or because of kedma and Torah. But I think once we're finished analyzing these gemaras, Im kein lamazeh anochi, the answer to that question was you never know. That's the answer. The answer to the question is that you're right, it's hard to raise good children, and you're right, there seems to be mixed messages over here, and it seems unclear that these kids are all going to come out to be what you need them, what you expected them to be. But you're supposed to have many children so that the odds are in your favor. Meaning, the answer is you never know. You're not supposed to be so certain. Now, what to do with the Chafetz Chaim story? So you could. There's a lot of versions how to resolve that. Either version number one, the easiest one, is it never happened. Exactly. No, this is ideological. I'm talking. This is not a halacha. The easiest one to say is that it never happened. Obviously, if that doesn't make you comfortable, so then you could say the Chafetz Chaim was talking about someone who was naturally not able to and was begging for like a nest. And the Chafetz Chaim trying to comfort her was like, don't, what I'm saying? Like you're pushing for a nest, like in a circumstance where it's not like like that. Or we're wrong, and the Chafetz Chaim understood from these various gemaras that there is a time and place when it's acceptable to say, the cost benefit analysis isn't there. I don't know that to be true, and I highly, highly doubt that if you would ask, any Paisik, he would say that. So I'll stick with one of the first 2 versions of how to deal with the Chafetz Chaim story. In any case, to me, it's an interesting thought experiment with these so many different gemaras that surprisingly are rayas, one way or the other here, that I think, unless...
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.